There are two documents, 20 years apart. The first is from June 1536. A 17-year-old girl puts her name to a paper stating that her mother's marriage was incestuous and unlawful, that she herself is illegitimate, and that the Pope has no authority in England. She signed it without reading it. The second is from October 1553. The same woman, now 37, is crowned Queen of England, the first woman in English history to rule in her own right. In the 20 years between those two signatures, she was given nothing. No title, no access to her mother, no protection. And here is the part that gets left out of the story entirely. That first signature, the one everybody reads as surrender, is one of the reasons the second one was possible. By the summer of 1536, Mary Tudor had run out of people. Her mother, Catherine of Aragon, had died in January. Anne Boleyn had been beheaded in May. And a year before that, Sir Thomas More and Bishop John Fisher had been executed for refusing the exact oath now being demanded of Mary. She had refused for nearly 3 years. So the king sent a delegation led by Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, who was reported to have said that if she were his daughter, he would beat her head against the wall until it was as soft as a boiled apple. She still refused. Then Eustace Chapuys came. Chapuys was the imperial ambassador and her mother's advocate for years, the closest thing Mary had to a friend in England. His reports lean heavily in her favour, which is worth remembering whenever we quote him. Chapuys told her to sign. Her cousin, the Emperor, said the same. Both had reached the same conclusion. If she did not submit, Henry would kill her. On the 22nd of June, 1536, Mary signed a document titled The Confession of Me, the Lady Mary. It has 3 articles. She acknowledges Henry as her sovereign. She recognizes him as supreme head of the Church of England and refuses the Bishop of Rome's pretended authority. And she accepts that the marriage between her father and her mother, called in the document the late Princess Dowager, was incestuous and unlawful. She signed all 3 without reading them. Then, on Chapuys' advice, she had a private protestation drawn up, recording that she had signed under compulsion and that it did not bind her conscience. She submitted and registered that the submission was void on the same day. A letter she wrote to her father around this time survives in the British Library, fire-damaged, catalogued as Cotton Manuscript Otho C10. It opens, "Most humbly prostrate before the feet of your most excellent majesty," and goes on to say that her heavy and fearful heart dare not presume to call him father. Chapuys recorded that afterwards she fell suddenly into a state of despondency and sorrow. To understand what that cost her, you need to know what she had been before it. Mary was born on the 18th of February 1516, the only child of Henry and Catherine to survive infancy out of at least 6 pregnancies. From birth, she was the most valuable marriage asset in Europe and was traded like one. At 2, betrothed to the Dauphin of France. At 6, cancelled and betrothed to her cousin the Emperor. That collapsed too. At 9, she was sent to the Welsh Marches with her own household and her own council. Never formally created Princess of Wales, but sent there to do the job. Her education was extraordinary even by royal standards. Her mother commissioned the Spanish humanist Juan Luis Vives to design a curriculum for her: Latin, Greek, French, Spanish, with Plato, Cicero and Seneca, and no romances. And she was a serious musician, a real player of the virginals and the lute, good enough that her father would have her play for visiting ambassadors. There is one detail about that which lands differently once you know what comes next. When Mary was cut off from her mother in 1533, Catherine wrote to her with advice on how to endure it. One suggestion was that she should comfort herself with her music. And then Catherine added a qualification: if she had been allowed to keep her instruments. Her mother did not know whether her daughter still had them. In 1533, Thomas Cranmer declared the marriage void. Anne Boleyn was crowned. Elizabeth was born in September. What happened next was administrative, and it was thorough. Her title went first. She was no longer the Princess Mary, she was the Lady Mary, a knight's daughter's form of address applied to the king's eldest child. Her household was dissolved. Her governess, Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, who had raised her, was dismissed. Salisbury offered to serve Mary at her own expense, with her own money and her own servants. Refused. Mary was sent to Hatfield, into the household of the infant Elizabeth, not as her sister, as part of the establishment. She fought it in the only way available to her, which was linguistic. Asked which room was hers, she said, the princess's. Letters addressed to the Lady Mary she refused to receive. She was 17, running her mother's playbook precisely. The response was to tighten. When the household moved, she was sometimes made to travel behind Elizabeth's litter rather than beside it. Her letters were intercepted. When she fell seriously ill, her own doctor was refused to her, and Chapuis had to petition for any physician to see her at all. She and her mother were never permitted to meet again. Catherine died in January 1536 without seeing her. Mary had held that line for 2.5 years. 5 months after her mother's death, she signed. The usual reading is that she broke. It is more useful to look at what the people around her were calculating. Start with Thomas Cromwell, because Cromwell did not want Mary dead, and his reasons had nothing to do with affection. In the summer of 1536, Henry's marriage to Catherine was void, so Mary was illegitimate. His marriage to Anne was void, so Elizabeth was illegitimate. His son Henry Fitzroy was dying, dead within weeks. Jane Seymour was not yet pregnant. If Mary died, the strongest remaining claim on the English throne belonged to James V, King of Scots. That was unacceptable to everyone in the room. And executing the Emperor's cousin risked a war England could not absorb. So Mary was being kept alive by arithmetic, not mercy. And Cromwell knew arithmetic could change. He told Chapuis directly that the girl's obstinacy could cost her her life. Now put Mary in that position. She has watched More and Fisher die for this oath, and a queen executed 6 weeks earlier. Her mother is 5 months dead. The ambassador and the emperor are both telling her to submit, and she has one instrument, the private protestation, which lets her sign the paper while recording that the signature does not bind her. She used it. She signed without reading and filed the objection the same day. That is not someone who is broken. That is someone doing the only thing that keeps her alive, and, in her own understanding, uncommitted. What happens after the submission is the part almost nobody covers, and we know it in remarkable detail because from 1536 her private accounts survive. They were published in 1831 by Frederick Madden as the Privy Purse Expenses of the Princess Mary, and they record 8 years of her life in individual payments. She was back at court within weeks, with an allowance and a household of her own. One of her first appointments was a fool named Jane, who stayed with her for years. The accounts record payments for Jane's clothes, her shoes, her medical bills, and for having her head shaved. There are regular payments to have her instruments tuned, and monthly music lessons for the virginals and the lute. She got her music back. There are payments for hunting, for riding, and for a great deal of gambling. She played for high stakes and lost often enough that it shows in the accounts. And she danced, so much that in the mid-1540s, her half-brother Edward, aged about 8, wrote to their stepmother, Catherine Parr, asking her to persuade Mary to spend less time on foreign dances and merriment, which he said did not become a most Christian princess. That is the same brother who would later try to force her out of the Mass. She walked in the procession at Edward's christening. She became genuinely close to Catherine Parr, who brought all three of Henry's children into one household. And in 1544, the Third Succession Act put Mary back into the line of succession after Edward. It did not restore her legitimacy. Parliament simply left that alone. So from 1544 onwards, Mary Tudor was legally a bastard and legally an heir to the throne of England at the same time. Hold on to that, because it decides everything later. Henry died in January 1547. Edward was 9, and the second half of Mary's 20 years is completely different in character, because this time she wins. Under Edward, the Mass was made illegal. Mary went on hearing it anyway. Her argument was not theological, it was constitutional, and it was sharp. Edward was a minor, and a king who is not of age cannot alter the religion of the realm. So her father's settlement stood until Edward came of age, and the laws made in his name meanwhile did not bind her. In 1550, the emperor sent 3 ships to the Essex coast to get her out of the country. The escape was planned in detail. At the last moment, she hesitated and stayed. At Christmas that year, she was summoned to court and confronted by her 13-year-old brother. Both of them ended the conversation in tears. In August 1551, 3 of the king's councillors arrived at her house to remove her comptroller and install the king's own man. What she said survives in Ellis's original letters, and it is the clearest thing anyone recorded her saying in 20 years. She would appoint her own officers. She was of sufficient years for that purpose. If they left such a man there, she would go out of her own gates, because the two would not dwell in one house. And then this, that she was sickly, but she would not die willingly, and would do the best she could to preserve her life. But that if she should chance to die, she would protest openly that the council were the cause of her death, that they gave her fair words, but their deeds were always ill towards her. Then she went into her bedchamber, came back, knelt, and handed the Lord Chancellor a ring to carry to her brother. And here is what she had built by then. Her comptroller, Robert Rochester, and 2 of her other officers were sent to the Tower, not for anything they had done, but for refusing to deliver the order banning the Mass to their mistress. 3 men went to prison rather than hand a piece of paper to a woman who was, in law, illegitimate. Edward died on the 6th of July, 1553. On paper, Mary had nothing. Count what Northumberland held that week. The army, the Tower and the Treasury, the fleet, the Privy Council which had signed, London, and a queen already proclaimed, Jane Grey, his own daughter-in-law. Mary held a country house at Hunsdon and about 150 people around her. She was summoned to London to attend her dying brother, worked out that it was a trap, and went east instead, onto her own estates. On the 9th of July, from Kenninghall, she wrote to the Privy Council, informing them that she was queen and instructing them to proclaim her. On the 12th, she moved to Framlingham in Suffolk, granted to her from the forfeited Howard estates the year before. It was defensible and near the coast, so if it failed, she could reach the Emperor's ships. Then the men came, around 15,000, and by some accounts more, in a matter of days. Northumberland marched out to take her, and his own army melted away underneath him. There was no battle at all. On the 19th, the council switched sides and proclaimed Mary in London. Now the part that answers the question this film opened with. Many of the men who came to Framlingham were not Catholic. East Anglia had strong Protestant communities, and some of her earliest supporters were openly Protestant. Historians generally read it the same way. They did not come for her religion. They came because her claim was lawful. And it was lawful for one specific reason. The Third Succession Act of 1544 named her by name as heir after Edward. Northumberland's device tried to set that statute aside using the will of a dying 15-year-old. To be in that act, Mary had to be alive in England and in her father's peace in 1544. She was all three because of what she signed in 1536. Her mother never signed anything and died at Kimbolton without seeing her daughter. Mary signed and became Queen of England. If this is holding your attention, hit the like button, and if you're watching on your phone, there's a hype button under this video. 3 of them are free every week, and for a channel this size, they count for a great deal. Her mother's side of this story is my film on Catherine of Aragon, the Queen who refused to sign. Tell me in the comments, who made the right call? The mother or the daughter? On the 3rd of August 1553, Mary rode into London through Aldgate, 37 years old, in purple velvet, with her sister Elizabeth riding beside her. The city put on everything: bells, gun salutes from the tower, bonfires, tables set out in the streets. Contemporaries put the escort in the thousands. 20 years earlier, this woman had been made to travel behind an infant's litter. At the Tower, she was met by the prisoners of the previous reign, kneeling on the green. Among them was Stephen Gardiner, Bishop of Winchester, locked up for most of Edward's reign. She raised them and pardoned them. She was crowned on the 1st of October at Westminster Abbey, and Gardiner performed the ceremony. Then her first Parliament met and did the thing she had waited 2 decades for. The first Act of Repeal declared the marriage of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon to have been valid all along, which meant that the document she had signed at 17 was in law wrong. She had spent 20 years as a bastard by act of the state, and she used the state to take it back. She had 5 years and 4 months left. She came to the throne at 37 with no husband and no heir, and everybody involved could do the arithmetic. She married Philip of Spain. She believed she was pregnant twice, in 1554 and again in 1557. Both times the court was prepared, and both times there was no child. And in those 5 years, close to 300 people were burned for heresy. And that is what her name is now attached to. This film is not a defense of those 5 years. But the name was not given by anyone who lived through them. Bloody Mary is an Elizabethan coinage, from Protestant writers working after she was dead and her sister was on the throne. And it stuck so hard that it is now the only thing most people can tell you about her. She died on the 17th of November, 1558. She was 42. She was buried in Westminster Abbey, and for 25 years, there was no monument on the grave at all. The monument that finally went up was not built for her. James I commissioned it for Elizabeth, and Mary was placed underneath. Elizabeth has the effigy. Mary has no figure of her own, only a line of Latin on the tomb, recording that 2 sisters share the vault. At 17, she signed her name to a paper that erased her. At 37, she used the Parliament of England to write it back. And where she is buried, she is underneath somebody else again.